Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute for Eliza to come on. Hi, everyone. I wanted to welcome you all to the third of our Instagram series, Policy and Power, with our incredible guest today, Eliza Reid. And if you want to hear our past Instagram lives, please, you can tune in onto nwbc.gov. And then this one, of course, will be posted later. And to give you an idea, our Instagram lives the purpose of them is to make sure that we lift up the journeys of really inspiring, successful women because they want to pay it forward for other people and really allow our audience members to feel like they're heard and they're not alone there. I am the proud chair of the National Women's Business Council, which is a nonpartisan, independent federal advisory council that came into existence in 1988 with the Women Business Ownership Act. And if you can believe it, 36 years ago, women were not able to take business loans without a male co-signing it. And at the same time, it was the establishment of women business centers all over the US. We have about 160 around the US that help women set up their businesses. The council is comprised of appointed members. They are business owners from both parties and then head of national women organizations. We represent 13 million business owners. We're the only organization that represent them. And we advise the president, Congress, and the SBA administrator on anything to do with regards to women entrepreneurs, women businesses. And we really do this through conversations with business leaders, policymakers. The most incredible thing, the strides that we've done is that today women own now 42% of the businesses, employ around 12 million people, and generate $2.7 trillion. And all else being equal, women could generate $7.2 trillion for the economy. I've had the privilege of visiting Iceland, so it's just such an honor for me today to have our incredible guest, Eliza Reid. Iceland really sets the tone for childcare and paid family leave. Childcare is subsidized by the government and available to all children. The cost is reduced at the age of 2 when children begin attending preschool and kindergarten. It's affordable. And with 4 children of her own, our incredible guest today understands the importance of accessible and affordable childcare. And at NWBC, we have been advocating access to affordable childcare for many, many years. And you can see more of our policy recommendations in the recommendations that are going to come out pretty much in a month in our policy recommendation. So a little bit about our special guest today. Eliza is a best-selling writer, public speaker, gender equality advocate, co-founder of the acclaimed Iceland Writers Retreat, and former First Lady of Iceland. She was born and raised in Canada, but has lived in Iceland for over 20 years. Her first book, Secrets of the Spark Car, Iceland's Extraordinary Women and How They Are Changing the World, which I loved reading, and I have a copy with me right here. I really recommend it to everyone. Was New York Times book review editor's pick. It's been translated to numerous languages. And now she's writing her first novel, an Iceland-set mystery called Death on the Island, and it'll be published in spring of 2025. From 2016 to 24, she served as unofficial role of First Lady while her husband was president of Iceland. And she's been named United Nations Special Ambassador for Tourism and the Sustainable Development Goals. She has degrees from University of Toronto, Trinity, and Oxford University. She's just passionate about inclusion, belonging, and equality. And I'm just so excited to have her on. Welcome, Eliza.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me on. I hope the technology is working well, that you can hear me all right.
I can hear you wonderful. And I think I wanted to tell everyone, we're going to have a conversation. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat and we're going to get to it at the end of our question and answers here. And we hear you great. So I wanted to start by saying women business ownership is incredible in Iceland, and it's high. And women in Iceland make up about 30% of C-suite positions in companies with over 100 employees and 40% in companies with more than 250 employees.
Mm-hmm.
What policies or factors were pivotal to get to that for gender parity, and what challenges do you still see?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. It's interesting when you say that it's incredibly high, the female participation, because I'm often asked, where do we need to be doing better in Iceland? And one of the areas that I always say is women in business, because we don't, to me, that's not a very high number. We're 50% of the population, and that's nowhere near coming up to that. So we have a long way to go. I think the reason that we've gotten as far as we have has to do with a lot of incentive that was provided earlier on. One, obviously, and we can talk in more detail about this later on, are the excellent childcare provisions that are, both subsidized daycare, but parental leave, which is provided to both parents as well. So that's a huge part of it, allowing people to take time off and then to go back to work. There are also quotas for the boards of publicly traded companies, and I would like to say that there is kind of this general movement or this acknowledgement, at least in Iceland, that working towards greater gender equality in society overall is something that will benefit people of all genders. So in theory, it should be that the greater female representation in business is going to reflect that. In reality, of course, we know that working towards equality is a choice that doesn't happen on its own and isn't just a matter of taking a box on a policy or a piece of paper. And we've seen a backlash in so many areas. In Iceland this year, there were fewer new female CEOs named than there have been in past years. So just because you take 2 steps forward doesn't mean that you're going to take 2 steps back. And I think that is one of the challenges that we face is the danger of complacency, of saying, well, look, we have these great numbers, so that's kind of good enough. Let's just not think about it. Now we've got the ball rolling, it's going to continue. And I think that isn't necessarily the case. As we see these changes in terms of more diversity in the boards and the companies, I think we also have to recognize that change is scary for people. And when you come and you talk to people about, we need to bring these new voices in and we need to do this, it's all one thing to show statistics and say that the more diverse a company or an organization is, the more profit on your bottom line. But it is change, and it can be scary. And I think it's human nature often to want to say, oh, I like how it is now. I know what it is. Yeah. I know the things that aren't working, but the knowledge of that is comforting to me. And so we need to listen to that. We need to understand that, and then kind of go on to talk about how, to make that less scary. And I would also talk about perception bias here, because I think when it comes to business, when it comes to women leaders and women politics, we still, all of us, men and women, have this perception that women aren't as good leaders, that women aren't as aggressive or as many go-getters as men are. And so we don't, when we're thinking of roles in our companies, we just don't necessarily think of this diverse group. And the best way of working to overcome bias is to acknowledge that we all have it. So there's the good news of all of those challenges, if I can put it that way. I talked about laws at the beginning and how that sort of sped up the process. The good news is that a lot of those challenges that I mentioned are things that you and I and everybody else can be doing. We don't have to say it's purely a matter of greater legislation, greater laws, because that's very trickle down and downstream, right? That leaves a lot of responsibility up to elected officials. Whereas I think we all need to take on some of that responsibility ourselves to maintain momentum, to encourage people to keep pushing for change, and to believe that we can all have an impact on that change ourselves.
No, I love that. I love what you're saying about not being complacent, because again, we looking at Iceland, it looks just wow. And, even there, you're saying there's just so much more work to do. And it's on all of us to make sure that we do that, not just, pushing it for the government. In your book, you highlight inspiring stories of women in Iceland and what a gender equal world could look like. And Iceland was ranked the best country for gender equality in 2023. What role have Iceland's policy around childcare and parental leave, do you think, have played in achieving this result?
Before I answer to them, just the policy and childcare exactly, to elaborate a little bit on my book, Secrets of the Sprakar. Sprakar is this old Icelandic word that means extraordinary women. And, I kind of like the idea that we have a word in the Icelandic language that describes exclusively women in an exclusively positive way. I think that I think that says a lot about the society. And when I wrote the book, I really wanted to profile and explain, what is it, what's it like to be a farmer, a politician, a mom, an entrepreneur, a business owner, a comedian in quote unquote the world's best country for women, and I wanted to not necessarily interview famous women, but speak to people in all kinds of areas and backgrounds to bring out the extraordinary and the ordinary, to bring out that tease out that thread of information that is special, that means that if you are an entrepreneur in Texas, you can somehow connect to the story of the fishing captain in the town of West Iceland. And so I try to do that, and then and through by that kind of explaining how society works. And one of those big things is to say, of course, are laws and legislation that really help to, I want to say, kind of speed up this process of what's happening. And a huge one is really kind of a revolution in terms of childcare and development. And I want to use the word revolution as well, because it wasn't always like this. It became this way because especially women, but a lot of people fought for this change and said, this is something that will make our lives all better. To explain very briefly how it works, the parental leave policy is paid for by the government. In our high Nordic taxes, I mean, there is a trade-off for this, but people are very happy to pay higher taxes in order to provide this service for everybody, paid for by the government and provided to both parents, and on a use it or lose it basis. And this means, and they're constantly changing the kind of nuance and how much. At the moment, one parent gets 5 months of paid leave. Paid leave is about 80% of your average salary over the last 2 years. The second parent in a 2-parent household gets another 5 months of paid leave. And then there's a third set of 2 months, so you get a year total, and either parent can take those 2 months. The idea being that one parent can't take the whole thing and therefore be fully responsible for kind of raising the child beforehand. So there isn't 100% take up on men, but there's a very large take up in terms of men who will then take 5 months of paid leave with their children. Not only does this increase the relationship between fathers and children, but it also reduces prejudice within companies, because people are going to think, well, this is someone of childbearing age. They may or may not take time off and then they'll come back. Once that parental leave scheme is finished, then the subsidized childcare takeover, and that is subsidized to different degrees for municipalities, but heavily subsidized anyway, but all to a good standard. So that when you're leaving your children in a preschool, it's met certain standards of safety, teaching and education. Now, is it perfect? No. Sometimes there's a waiting list. They need more preschool qualified teachers. There's lots of areas that we can improve on, but that is the general idea behind it and why it works. And it means that Iceland has the highest level of female participation in the workforce of all the OECD countries.
That's incredible. I mean, I like what you said is, if we can achieve it, it doesn't have to be perfect. We can get to perfect later, but at least, and look how much is done.
I'm going to actually, what you say that too, it is an interesting point for me with the kind of battle for gender equality overall that I think is really important, is that in Iceland, we talk a lot about this day when many of the country's women took a day off in the 1970s, and just the movement in general. And I think one of the reasons that has been successful is because it's a very broad-based movement. So, I know that saying left wing and right wing is limiting in and of itself, but it's people working for greater equality do combine all those things. And so a lot of people within this movement, if you want to call it that, have very differing opinions on a lot of things to do with politics and a lot of ways of how to prioritize this. And it's kind of a big tent that allows people to go and at least come together on this one area. And that, I think, is also very important. I think, of course, we're going to disagree on it. And I think that's really, really important to do that. But we also all want to be equal.
Yeah, you also understand the importance of it. You've been such a strong advocate for gender equality and women's rights. In your view, what role can women-owned businesses play in advancing gender equality, both locally and globally?
I mean, in both areas, role models, I think, in general, are incredibly important. I think that, that old, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so I think that is incredibly important for young people to see that. And as you said, these businesses thrive, and we see them around the world in different areas. So that's important for investors to trust that their money is being invested in a reliable area. And it kind of spills over a lot. And the more people they are, the more that you can kind of talk together as well. And there's a little bit that example that I just used about the big tent. Not all women entrepreneurs are exactly the same just because they're women.
Yeah.
And some will be effective, some will be ineffective. And the fewer that we have, the more narrow the expectations of what we put on them. The less room there is for them to make mistakes. The less room there is for them to wiggle out of whatever box we've decided we have to put them in. And I don't think that does anybody any favors. We need to be diverse, just as these companies that these women are founding are very diverse.
That makes so much sense, that you'll be looked at it out a lot more if our numbers are so much smaller, as opposed to if there's such a big diversity, to see who does better. As the former First Lady of Iceland, you've had a unique platform to support and promote women's initiatives. How do you see the role of government and public figures in fostering an environment where women entrepreneurs can thrive?
I think, there's two aspects of there. You talk about government, you talk about public figures. To answer the government first, because as First Lady, of course, I wasn't representative of the government. And I guess political opinions do come into play in this. So I'm speaking, with my own opinion. I do think that government can be very effective in implementing change, with some of these examples that I've said, with legislation that is encouraging to speed up the process of that is using public funds effectively to be able to support the benefit for the greater good. That's very much the Nordic welfare state model, to provide a kind of common level, high level of basic education. Then you talk to the role of public figures, and that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, having been a public figure. But to speak more broadly, we are all role models, and you don't have to be. What is a public figure? Is it a public figure if I lead the Sunday school at my church on the weekends? Am I a public figure if I have a huge family and we meet together all the time? Or if I am a teacher and I am teaching classrooms? Or if I'm the First Lady? And I think that we all have that influence on these communities. And so it's really up to us whether we want to be positive role models or negative role models. And I think that is important to remember. And that was something when I served as First Lady that I really tried to emphasize, is that, I grew up on a farm in Canada. I met my Icelandic husband on a blind date when we were in graduate school. He was a professor. He became president in a span of 6 weeks, never having run for public office in his life. You can read about that in the book, but it's as ridiculous as it sounds. And I had this moment where all of a sudden I did have this much bigger platform. And I thought, do I grasp hold of this scary opportunity to have my voice heard, or do I just dress in nicer clothes and smile next to him a lot? And I just decided that it was such a special opportunity that I wanted to use it, but that's really scary as well. And we make mistakes doing that, and that's also okay. And so I just think that, the important thing to remember is that we're all role models in some way, and it doesn't matter how big your platform is or not.
We
hold our governments accountable. Of course, we should do that too.
We see that a lot here, because we have such a big business boom that has been spurred by women. And a lot of these people that I talk to, they're small businesses, but I encourage them so much to go to high schools, to go to schools. Like, younger girls, young women need to see that this is possible. You can get there. And the role of a role model, to your point, like, you don't necessarily have to be a public figure, but anyone, if you can just reach down and lift up somebody, it's so important in that way.
Totally. And you talk about schools, like, we all remember our favorite teachers. We remember those people who came and spoke to our class and said, did this, and who made an impression on us at that impressionable age. That's so important. And as a foreigner, talking to a group of American women here, what is America known for? It's known for innovation. It's known for independence and creativity and a kind of go-get-'em attitude, right? And we don't need to leave, lots of men have that, and that's wonderful, but we don't need to leave that all up to
No.
them. And that's part of Voices, and what a great combination, you know, to have that kind of gumption and the go get 'em and I can succeed, kind of build the American dream mentality combined, you know, with creating diversity and equality.
Absolutely. I love that. Um, as someone who's navigated both the creative and business world, what advice would you give to women entrepreneurs who are trying to balance their passions with the with the practicalities of running a business, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, you know, running a business is a creative enterprise. You know, you wouldn't, if you didn't have creativity, you couldn't run a successful business. So I think when people sort of separate creativity, that doesn't behoove your business either. And in the same way that creative types, you know, as I said, I'm writing this book now, and there's a lot of practical sides. I still have to do the accounting and the bookkeeping and all of the business sides of being an independent person that you do anyway. So all of these things kind of combine. I think for many people, it can be helpful to have support networks, you know, because it is challenging. I founded one tiny business, the Iceland Writers Retreat, that I still run for writers. And it's an emotional roller coaster, right? To think, am I going to be a failure? If I'm a failure, how does I do this? And just, it's very helpful, I find, at least to be able to have other people that you can talk to, so that you know that some of these challenges can be done in a vacuum, or maybe some of these challenges other people have already solved and you don't need to resolve it. And I think seeking support, persisting, you know, knowing that there'll be good days and hard days, and then you know, I say in gender equality a lot, it's not good enough to say it's good enough. You know, it's not good enough to say we're almost there, that's close enough, we almost earn enough money. But it is good enough to say good enough in terms of that unrealistic balance of work and private life.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, you know, we know that women still in heterosexual households still disproportionately look after that mental load, you know, remembering the kids' birthday parties and the practices. You know, I was telling you right before we started that, you know, maybe one of my kids is going to knock on the door and ask what's for supper. And that's being unfair because it's my husband's supper cooking night. But still, you know, we have to do that. We're not going to get it all right all the time. And that's okay. And we can't be too hard on ourselves, because the one thing, when we're busy, we don't want to spend that valuable time of ours worrying about how we're not doing anything right.
Yeah. No, you're so right. I mean, the support network means so much. And what I see here so often is that there is a lot of support. We have a lot of organizations, we have a lot of mentors, but a lot of women don't ask or don't go look for it because they feel like it's on their own shoulder and they should do it. And what we really try to promote is to let people know. And I hope, like, this is why we do these Instagram live series, to know that there are people that they can go to. There are, you know, don't be afraid to ask. Somebody has lived what you're going through for sure and can help you that way.
And it, you know, just asking, just knowing that someone has heard it is often really, really helpful. Just kind of getting it out there, even if the initial problem hasn't quite been solved yet. I think that's really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. These are my questions. I'm going to let, please, anybody on the audience, if you have questions, just put it in the chat and then we'll ask. And I guess one of the questions we're getting is that is there an advice that you wish somebody had given you? Even, you know, you writing your books is you being an entrepreneur. Like, is there an advice that you wish you knew before you get into all these things that you're doing?
You know, that's the kind of question that I will wake up in the middle of the night and have the perfect answer for it. And I don't, you know, off the top of my head right now. And I think maybe the only thing that I can think of to answer on the spur of the moment is, I think that great thing that we're all doing is not to be kind of too hard on myself. You know, my husband sometimes calls me Eliza, because as soon as I finish an event, I kind of go through it all in my mind. And I think, okay, did I speak too fast? Was that good? Oh, I should have said this. And he says, like, you're done. It's, you know, could have been better, could have been worse. Like, don't even think about it. And I think I spend too much time, maybe, of course, we want to improve on things all the time, but just, you know, analyzing what could have happened or not, when, you know, I have to learn not to sweat the small stuff. So for me, I would say it's that kind of thing.
I absolutely agree with you. I think as women, we tend to do that a lot too. We question ourselves so much. Whereas, you're successful, you know what you're talking about, you know what to ask for, and that is not a necessary thing. Let me see what other questions we're having. And I am having a hard time reaching that out.
I'm glad you're in charge of the tech.
Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not. But it's being quiet here. What would be your, as we're putting out policy recommendations on childcare and giving specific example, one of the things that comes up is making sure that it fits the needs of the people needing the childcare. And you were saying that in Iceland it's not perfect, but it does. So what are some of the challenges that sometimes is not perfect that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's an interesting example. So in Iceland, I am not sure, but I'm pretty sure it's exclusively 8 to 4 Monday to Friday, except holidays. And, maybe a little bit longer. And in the summertime, when everyone goes on holiday, so do the people at the preschool. So it closes for a month. And that isn't necessarily that feasible for people, or people aren't always able to take that specific month on holiday. Or if you have to drop off and pick up the kids at a certain time, those are the exact hours of a full-time job. So again, it's kind of built around a very two-parent household where one parent is dropping off and the other parent's picking up, who are working a 9-to-5 job and not necessarily shift work. In Sweden, for example, they do have daycares that run on different times. So that's a big one. And I haven't been following this enough, but there was a municipality this year that introduced new legislation where they lowered all the prices of the preschools. It was almost, I want to say almost free, but not quite. Wow. And I could be wrong, up to 5 or 6 hours. And then after that, those last hours got really expensive. And so the idea was they were trying to sort of encourage, I guess, people to not have their kids at 9 hours a day in the preschool. But some people have to do that or not. And so, and I confess, I just haven't been following it well enough to know how it's been turning out. But I would say, off the top of my head, that one of those challenges is the hours. And the other is finding teachers, because, in Iceland, like many places, teachers aren't paid the salaries that I can say this more now because I'm not serving in any roles. I think they should be paid a lot higher salaries. And especially, in preschool, I get, it's a lot of work looking after a lot of kids.
Absolutely. Sadly, we don't have, I could have this conversation with you for another couple of hours, but we are coming to the end of our conversation. I just wanted to let everybody know to go on your website, which is elizareid.com, correct? And make sure you look her up, her 2 incredible books. She does a lot of speaking everywhere, and she just has a wealth of experience and knowledge. It was so amazing to hear about when you talk about perception bias, never be complacent, change is always hard, and also never give up and advocate. Don't leave it all to the government to be doing that. And I think all of that are just very important points. Again, we're going to have the recording of this on our website, which we will share later. We are going to put out our 2024 policy recommendations by the end of this month, and you're going to have access to that. And please do reach out to us, sign up on our Instagram, on our LinkedIn, on our newsletter. We want to hear from everyone, what it is that you want to hear, what will be helpful to you, and look at us as, your experience matters to us. So look at us as people that will learn from our experience to come up with these policy. Any last word, Eliza?
I think that those are all great. I think I would just remind people that equality is a choice, and it's not going to happen unless we all put our effort into doing that. And it's going to help everybody, not one particular group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Such an honor to have you here, and I can't wait to see what else you do.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.